We were the first administration to identify in decades, and this isn't partisan, to identify the Chinese Communist Party as the single greatest competitor. We use the word competitor. I would use the word adversary today if I were writing this myself. The single biggest challenge to the American way of life. I hope this administration will keep that at the center. It doesn't mean there aren't other challenges that one has to confront, but it is, and you can even see this even in Ukraine today, the Chinese Communist Party itself understands power deeply, and they respect only power.
Do you think the Biden administration will, how do you think they'll balance their concerns about China with climate, right? The interim strategy noted that China was a strategic competitor, but also at the same time really left the door open for a lot of cooperation, especially in areas of climate. How do you interpret that approach?
I think President Biden himself is going to have to weigh in on this. You can see inside their list of stars that are trying to align around the president. There are very different views on this. I take 2 points as what I would expect. Not too terribly long ago, President Biden was with a group of soldiers. He told those soldiers, uniformed military personnel, that the greatest security risk to the United States of America was climate change. I think that's very telling about what he personally believes. Second, the senior administration official that met with Xi Jinping first and with Vladimir Putin first was Secretary Kerry, not Secretary Blinken, not Secretary Austin, not the president himself, the climate guy. I actually think that Xi and Putin and the Ayatollah and Chairman Kim all took note of that priority. That is an enormous mistake.
What is your view of arms control and the Chinese? Because you touched upon that in your piece as well. What's your sense about, can we really be, realistically, is that a framework that could work?
It could. It will take the Chinese willingness to engage. We would remind them they wanted to claim superpower status. Superpowers don't threaten the world with annihilation. Superpowers engage in rational conversations about how we can make sure that these most dangerous weapons are never actually employed. And so we wanted them to be part of this conversation. They would always say, well, there are other players besides Russia, China, and the United States. We would say, great, let's make sure that the world is working along the same central thesis that, frankly, we had good, Reagan put some good arms control arrangements in place that just took down the threat some. We could do that again, but it's no longer the case that an agreement just between 2 countries is possible to achieve those kinds of threat reduction.
So that might be an opportunity, right, as the Biden administration is rewriting the strategy,
yes, I would hope so.
Thinking about opportunities
yes.
Going forward, arms
definitely.
Control being one.
Yeah, definitely. The Chinese resisted this. Their program was still smaller, they said less advanced. That may or may not be completely accurate. Whatever stage their program is, it's imperative that we bring them inside this discussion so that we are at least transparent about what each side has. We want to make sure there's no miscalculation. This is very dangerous stuff.
Do you think they'll see other opportunities? One I was thinking about was really reaffirming the importance of regional balances of power, right? That was another element of the 2017 strategy, of recognizing how important regions are and the economic, political, and military balancing that needs to go on in regions. What we're seeing now in some ways with the Russian invasion was how out of sync that balance was, right? Russia had been focused on its military power for years while European allies were decreasing theirs.
Right. Yes, I think the whole world can see this plainly. Yeah. I think this will matter. I think the Europeans will, I was going to say get religion, but more importantly, get power back in their central understandings of how it is they can provide security for their own people. Nadia, I do worry. By the way, I think countries, I was just in Taiwan, and I was in Singapore on that same trip. I think they're watching this very attentively as well. They can see that they're going to have to step up their capacity to make sure that they aren't the next victim of an autocratic leader who decides aggression is the solution to all that ails. But also one other thing that's on my mind, when you talk about strategies, you're not talking about next week or next month or even next year. You're thinking about trajectories measured in decades. I pray that when this moment passes, whenever Putin settles in for whatever the outcome is that Europe won't forget. They forgot when they took 1/5 of Ukraine. When they took Crimea, everybody put sanctions in place and then said, let's go meet in Minsk, and did almost nothing. And the Europeans did very little to secure their own freedom. I pray that when this moment passes, that this won't have been ephemeral. This call to arms, this desire to spend 2 or 3% of their GDP to secure their own freedom won't be a passing moment. It takes leaders, Nadia. It takes leaders who are prepared to say, here's our strategy. Here's for how we're going to deliver this. And this is what this means to our nation, whether you're Belgium or Switzerland or Vietnam. This is what this means to the people of our nation, and we are not going to sit at risk from the Chinese Communist Party or Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, certainly we've seen with the Germans, right, that it's been a remarkable shift, and now the key will be, is it sustainable over the long term, with leaders being key. But before we wrap, I would like to get your sense of what do you think China is learning from the current situation, and how does that apply to how they're thinking about Taiwan?
So before I say what I think they're learning, I want to talk about what I'm pretty sure they're not learning. They are not learning that their vision for global hegemony is at risk. Mm-hmm. I can't see anything that will cause Xi Jinping to change his vision for being the Middle Kingdom to be this global hegemonic power. I don't think whatever problems Vladimir Putin may be having in conquering Kyiv, I don't think this is going to change Xi Jinping's vision at all. My guess is he's going back to his generals and his admirals and saying, are we really as good as you told me we are? Are these programs as real? Can we deliver them? We want to train more. We want to do more. I think his use of hard power and their capacity will only be encouraged by this. He'll see that no, we not only have to have it, we have to be effective in our ability to execute it. What does that mean for Taiwan?
So he might be biding his time.
He may bide his time. He may step back for just a moment, and he may conclude that he can capture Taiwan or bring Taiwan into the Chinese orbit without use of kinetic power, without use of true hard power. But he might not. He might decide to circle an island, to blockade a particular set of activities. Would be a path that was somewhere in the middle and would still achieve his ultimate objective. His tactics may well change, but his objective, I can't imagine, would be altered. When I was on Taiwan, I think they knew that too. Their ask of me was to make sure that when I came back, we talked about the things that America could do to help them with their regional friends and partners, the Japanese, the Australians, the South Koreans ought to be part of this too, to build out a collective security set of understandings for them, and to make sure the Taiwanese had the capacity to defend themselves, to make sure that Xi Jinping's calculus included an enormous cost should he decide to move. This is the way they were thinking about it. I share that view. We've had this idea of ambiguity for the United States policy in Taiwan for a long time, and we've spoken out of both sides of our mouth. My view is that what we saw in Ukraine was being in the middle is really dangerous. Mm-hmm. Being in an ambiguous place is really, really dangerous. The authoritarians will use that ambiguity against you every time. We ought to acknowledge that Taiwan is an independent nation. It's not part of the Chinese Communist Party. We ought to just acknowledge that simple fact. Everyone will say that it's not, that it is independent, but no one wants to recognize it. We ought to simply do that. I think that would provide the clarity that would reduce risk for the people of Taiwan.
That would be interesting to see if the Biden administration will take that to heart in their national security strategy.
You would need to be prepared to help the Taiwanese truly defend themselves.
Right.
And that includes not only weapon systems, it includes intelligence sharing, it includes all the training to make sure they're capable of using them, and then it would mean building out this alliance. Not every Southeast country will say this publicly, but privately they will all say that this demands not American soldiers and sailors and boots on the ground. It means America's know-how and wisdom and a strategic understanding that's prepared to support them when the moment strikes.
Right, but that's sustainable.
So that is sustainable over the long haul.
It doesn't, you can't develop capabilities overnight.
No, these are, know, you've been down this path. These are years long, in some cases decades long when it comes to your nuclear deterrent force, certainly decades long. We're flying airplanes that are 50 years old. We've got ground-based missile systems that are ancient. It is time.
Well, as we wrap I'd like to wrap on a high note and just ask you, so what were some of your favorite moments as Secretary, and if you had any advice to give Secretary Blinken, what would that be?
Secretary Blinken will find his own way. I don't want to give him any public advice. You know, I was really proud of the work we did to identify the Chinese Communist Party as this central challenge, not just a military challenge, but one that's inside the gates here at home, where we disrupted one of the largest spy operations in the history of the United States being run out of the Chinese consulate in Houston, Texas. We were serious about protecting the American people from the economic predation that they'd engaged in. And while there was still a lot of work to do, I think we changed course there.